Assassin's Creed Syndicate, more like Assassin's Creed Shit-ticate, am I right? Huh? I'm sorry. It probably comes as no surprise to anybody that I'm not exactly the biggest fan of the Assassin's Creed series, but that wasn't always the case. I loved 2 and Brotherhood. Hell, even Revelations was an enjoyable game, but after the sledgehammer to the testicles that was Assassin's Creed 3, I was done with this series. I skipped 4, which I only recently got as part of Games with Gold, and with my amazing precognitive abilities, I miraculously managed to predict AC Unity would be the kind of coat hanger abortion you don't even give the courtesy of tossing in a dumpster. When AC Syndicate rolled around, I literally forgot it was releasing, and against better judgment, I opted to pick up the game, almost hoping it would be terrible so I could tear it to pieces. Unfortunately, what we got was far more boring. Assassin's Creed Syndicate, while failing in many different aspects, isn't exactly terrible at being a video game, but you can count the number of ways it excels on a nub. If we were to use the food analogy, it's the equivalent of a grey bowl of paste sitting right in front of you. It's not as bad as drinking the cyanide you were given last year, but given a choice of anything marginally edible, you're gonna forget about the grey paste faster than Xbox fanboys cry media bias. Assassin's Creed Syndicate is the definition of a mediocre sequel. The traversal is improved, the setting is solid, and the central plot is at least somewhat coherent, if as bare as the bones of an Everest climber whose friend opted not to eat his bowl of cereal before starting his trek. But if you're like me and long fell out of love with the series when 3 compressed your testicles like a hooky you didn't tip, you will not find anything here. It's basically nothing new. It is fundamentally the same game but with new flaws. In Assassin's Creed Syndicate, you assume the role of oh wait, that's right, because Assassin's Creed still insists on featuring a confusing and drawn out present day assassin conflict. You play as the Initiate, I'm not kidding, who is trying to track down a piece of Eden in London for some reason. Considering I didn't beat 4 and skip Unity, I was completely confused as to what was going on. Maybe it would have made more sense if the story wasn't told in 30-second cutscenes that play out only about once every hour. In the actual story, you play as Jacob and Evie Fry, twin assassins who completely out of the blue decide to hightail it to London and embark on a noble quest to liberate peasants. I will admit that I like both characters. Jacob is kind of a cocky douche and Evie is the responsible sibling. Along the way, for some reason, these two are so important that they meet basically every notable individual who lived during the mid-19th century. Charles Dickens, Charles Darwin, Florence Nightingale, Queen Elizabeth, and numerous other characters. The central plot is alright for what it is. The simple premise sets up the story quickly, and unlike 3, which took 6 hours before you got to the part of the game advertised, you immediately start as an assassin doing the typical sneaking and stabbing. It's just a shame that the character development in this game is so woefully lacking. I mean, you need to be borderline retarded not to see the inevitable sibling conflict coming from a mile away. Starrick, who serves as the protagonist of this game, I found to be pretty stupid. He falls under the current trend of antagonist development, which is now boiled down to the writers just making the character batshit, wiping their hands clean going, well, my work is done, like a teenager impressed by how long his mid-afternoon wank lasted. Maybe this would work if it wasn't completely inconsistent with his role. Vast worked as a crazy character because his violent overreactions and tendencies were why he was in power. His unpredictability made him intimidating. Starrick is supposed to be a meticulously planning Templar, yet lashes out when something goes wrong. How the hell could he be a ruthless and meticulous planner when if you walk into his room and deliver an important message, he paints the wall with your brain matter? Despite Ubisoft's continuous efforts not to set an Assassin's Creed game in feudal Japan or ancient China, I must admit that London is a pretty cool setting for the game. Running around the streets of London feels pretty damn authentic for the time period of the game, and unlike the Order, you actually get to explore it. Now, considering Assassin's Creed Unity was a technical abomination and an affront to game optimization, my primary concern from an objective standpoint coming into this game was performance. I knew coming in the game would run at 30 FPS on consoles, and I'm baffled that it still struggled to hit that frame rate. It runs better than Unity, but in crowds, on rooftops, and especially when on carts, the frame rate tanks hard. Maybe this would be marginally forgivable if the game's visuals were blowing me away, but the game doesn't look that great. I'm not talking about the designs, those are excellent. The architecture, character designs all look great, but the textures are noticeably low res. Some of the cat models look like preschool claymation figures. I have to say that I really like the game's soundtrack. The gaming industry has been overtaken with bois over the last decade, so it's nice to see a soundtrack mostly comprised of string-focused tracks and actually subdued and more subtle. It's definitely appropriate for the setting of this game. But of course, this is mostly positive, and I said the game wasn't good, so what could possibly be holding it back? I really wonder. Could it be the glaring issues Assassin's Creed has had since the second installment? Could it be what you spend a great deal of your time doing? Look, I never said my comedy was subtle. The game's glaring issues are present in the gameplay department as usual. Combat is just as repetitive and crap as it's been for years. Nothing but tapping square over and over and occasionally breaking circle to counter and tapping X to break defense. You need the reflexes of a sloth on Sunday not to wrap your head around the combat in 5 seconds. As has been the case for the Assassin's Creed series since 2, the game is too easy. I died more times than I did in some of the previous Assassin's Creed games, but not nearly enough to consider this game a challenge. In this game, the lack of difficulty is not due to being able to counter everything, but simply because once you get the grappling hook, which like every enhanced traversal tool makes it too easy to escape, you don't need to fight anybody anymore. It's basically the ultimate fuck this I'm out tool. To try and buff the difficulty, AC Syndicate introduces a leveling mechanic where the opponents you face are of a certain level. Instead of making higher level enemies smarter or more vicious in their attacks, like a good game, they just have more health. This wouldn't be a problem if it were not for the game's downright fucked progression system. Unless you want to be wailing on enemies with the health of a black rhinoceros on steroids, you gotta do them to earn more skill points and level up. And if you don't, you'll be sat fighting these enemies for literally minutes. And it's not hard, it just takes forever. Look at this clip, I got a cramp doing this. If your game physically hurts to play, something is wrong. I kid you not, during certain fights, I literally memorized the attack patterns and would look at my phone in the midst of combat. I will admit that Syndicate has a greater focus on stealth than the other titles. Eagle Vision now operates like the camera of basically every open world game, which actually allows you to tag and track enemies. There is a proper sneaking system which allows you to take cover, better keep track of enemies, and assassinate from different angles. And some of the skills are better for stealth, but of course the game screws this up too. I don't generally blame games when I fail, but for the times that I did fail and get detected, I always thought it was the controls. The controls are just ass backwards. Too many commands are mapped to the same button. Circle is used to kidnap, knock out, carry, steal, enter vehicles, exit vehicles, and free run down. And that's just what I can think of right now. Because of this, you will inevitably screw up because you forget which button to hold or press, or the game won't do what you actually wanted. So you kidnap a guy, reach your cart, and hold circle because you think that's how you put them in the car, but oh no, that's Cessna 3, and then they run back into the crowd, and then you gotta fight them all off. And don't even think about restarting, because if you do, you'll be hit with the loading screens that give the runtime of The Return of the King a run for its money. So many times when I was detected, it wasn't because my approach was wrong. I'd think it out and I'd make my move at the right time, but then I'd screw up and either hold a button I had to tap, or tap a button I had to hold, or my target reticule would lock onto one guy instead of two, or the wrong guy, and send me hurtling into one successful kill but into a crowd of enemies. The fact of the matter is that this series needs to change fundamentally in the gameplay department. Stealth playstyles need to be cultivated in ways beyond, oh, to get full synchronization, don't kill anybody. I'm talking about making it more fun and rewarding to play stealthy and more difficult to fight, but not just by increasing enemy health. And if they're going to continue emphasizing the combat, it needs a complete overhaul. The current system needs to go the way of Kotaku's journalistic ethics. We need heavy attacks, light attacks, parries, actual combos. And if you're going to say that's not realistic, then remind me about all those wrist-mounted guns that existed in 15th century Italy. Tell me about how a person can land from a 4-story roof onto the ground and still keep their femur contained within their skin. This series isn't realistic, it needs an actual combat system. As an open world game, you're probably wondering how fun and rewarding it is to explore. It's not. Just like every Ubisoft open world game, there is a liberation system where completing side missions removes enemy influence in certain areas, which they force on you as it's the best means of leveling up. The side missions are fun the first couple of times you do them, but you don't do them a couple of times. Each section of London, in order to liberate areas, you will have to do the same side missions over and over. You've got the standard Ubisoft open world strongholds, or whatever synonym Ubisoft found on Microsoft Word to name them, freeing children, which is nearly the same fucking thing, and two very similar locate, neither assassinate or kidnap missions, and that's really it. And then there are just the cardinal sins of game design. The missions are mostly mundane, and sometimes pretty terrible. Escort missions suck, yet they continue to exist in the series. Vehicle sections are dreadful, and there are a lot of kidnap missions which are like worse versions of escort missions. One particular tail mission was especially bad considering I was often detected because a gang member I didn't recruit strolled along into a Templar gathering. That mission itself was god awful, as are most tail missions. Thankfully, not all of the missions are as appealing as herpes. The standout missions in this game are definitely the assassination missions, which see the player infiltrating much larger playgrounds to assassinate their targets. In these missions, the players can complete optional objectives to get access to different locations and perks, and otherwise more effectively assassinate their target. These were really solid, legitimately stealthy, and tactical missions, more along the vein of the structure of the original Assassin's Creed where there was build up to assassinating a target. Unfortunately, as these missions only occur at the end of sequences, you're going to be spending far more time engaging in dull and boring missions, like driving people around, tailing people, stealing things. It all starts to blur together, and by the time I was about halfway through, I wanted the game to end. That is the real problem with Assassin's Creed Syndicate. It's just not diverse enough in the experiences offered to hold your interest. Sure, if you don't think about it, then the game seems extremely diverse, but missions rarely deviate from get into the location, use Eagle Vision to locate everything, and variations on either kill the dude, steal the thing, or find this place. Once I hit sequence 8, I was met with a wall telling me I had to liberate one more borough to unlock the sequence, and at that point I came to the realization that after a while I just stopped doing the side missions entirely, focusing on getting through the game and beating it. And that right there nails it on the head. I had no real desire to explore, do side missions, or otherwise attempt to immerse myself in this game. Is it a functional game? Yeah, but does that make it an 8 or 9 out of 10? Maybe a 90er, but at least in my opinion, an amazing or even a good game. It's the type of game you see yourself revisiting, and I just do not see myself playing Assassin's Creed Syndicate again, or remembering anything about it. It's just another in the increasingly long series of Assassin's Creed games. I beat the game in about 13 hours, which for an open world game is not that great, but in all honesty, I was kind of hoping the game would end so I could stop playing it. And hell, by the time I reached the final boss, I was this close to throwing my controller at the screen and going, nope, I'm done, I don't care anymore, because the final boss is terrible. You can see right here that this guy's health was so high, I'd already hit a combo in excess of 300 hits, and I barely even damaged the guy. Would I recommend Assassin's Creed Syndicate? No, I wouldn't. The combat is repetitive and boring, excluding a few exceptions, mission structure is pure garbage, the leveling system is unfair, and ultimately, you're not going to remember this game fondly once you beat it. From a presentation standpoint, the game is solid, but I play games, and as long as I breathe oxygen, this game is lacking. The Assassin's Creed series needs some chemo because a lot of the issues this game has are fundamental and could have been addressed were it not for the fact that these games release every year. Assassin's Creed Syndicate is yet another mediocre game in a series with a penchant for becoming increasingly crap. But hey, Destiny is still popular, so maybe people do like mundane, boring, repetitive games with the entertainment value of piss in a jar.